The committee is called to order.
Can I take my mask off? Exactly. I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. Nicholas. And as you would have been aware, we are holding public hearings on the efficiency and effectiveness of the Utility Regulation and Competition Office in a report done by the Office of the Auditor General in June 2020. And you are here, you've been summoned to appear on behalf of Rubis Cayman Islands. So welcome, and thank you for taking the opportunity. The first question you answer, please state your full name and title. That is for purposes of the Hansard, so that your official name and title are properly recorded. And I don't have to try to mispronounce it to record it, sir. Thank you. And I'll invite Mr. Chris to lead off the question.
Good morning, Mr. Nicholas, and welcome. As the chairman noted earlier, sorry, we are actually just looking at the Auditor General report on off-reg, and one of the things that we wanted to do was to get a 360 analysis of the regulator itself. As elected representative, we have gotten feedback from the public in terms of their views on off-reg. Some case maybe a little bit, rightly or wrongly, but they have put their views out. And we think in order to get a more 360 view, it would be interesting to bring in the players that off-reg also deal with, to look at what it is that we can do to have a much better regulator, because I think it's safe to say that everyone believes that these industries do need to be regulated to some extent, but at the same time we also recognize that you have a responsibility as shareholders to make sure that what it is you do is also profitable, just as though we also have a responsibility to the consumers to make sure that what it is that they're receiving is value for money. So one of the things that we wanted this session to be is more informational, more educational. It's not meant to be confrontational or adversarial, but also give the public a better opportunity to understand what Rubis is about also. One of the things that your competitor said even before the last question was more from a public education standpoint, that more needs to be done into terms of having the public to get a better understanding of the industry, and at least maybe that was set with expectations. I noticed from your website that you guys have also done that with your Fuel IQ part on it, which I think is actually quite commendable because it does give an explanation and some things. So that's what we're more here looking for, just to kind of public education, more informational, and what it is that we can do to get a better regulation in the market. This is a new area of regulation for us. It's only a little over 3 years old now since we started regulating the fuel market. So we're just trying to see what changes we need to be, whether via legislation or even by a regulation, to see what we can do to make it more efficient and effective. So with that, I'll just ask you my first question is pretty much, can you just kind of walk us through Rubis history more in Cayman, and what it is that we can expect from Rubis in the future, and what are the exciting things to come?
Good morning, Honorable Chairman and honorable members of this Assembly. My name is Nicolas Henry Martin Debrain, or Debrain, if I want to pronounce it the French way. You can call me Nick. That's usually the best way. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the clarification about the purpose or objectives of this hearing, which I completely adhere to, and I'm happy, without being professorial, I hope, to bring more clarity about the fuel industry, especially the one I'm representing with Rubis. To answer your precise questions about history of our presence in the Cayman Islands and the future, Rubis acquired the Chevron downstream fuel activities in the wider Caribbean between 2012 and between 2010, and 2012. Cayman Islands became part of the downstream oil Rubis portfolio in 2012. What we have done so far is transitioning from the Chevron days to the Rubis days, which means a lot of investments. I cannot give very accurate figures for competition reasons, but let's say that we've invested nearly 20 million US in the Cayman market over the last 7 years. What happens is when a major oil company divests its business somewhere, they usually tend to slow down the investments in the previous years. And when someone acquires such businesses, then you have to put the necessary amount of money for rebuilding the infrastructure, especially the storage one and the distribution ones, and also to invest in the future, because our company is entering markets and has been so for the last 30 years. On the long term, we are not a company interested in buying, increasing the profitability of our businesses for the purpose of reselling them with a markup. This is clearly not the strategy of the Rubis Group. So what the future will be made of? It will be made of bringing the best value for money we can to our customers, increasing the market shares as much as we can, because in our industry, volume is the key element to offset the huge costs it takes to operate our industry. Investing in improving the safety of our operations and the nature of our business, importing, distributing fuels, is a permanent reinvestment circle through new regulations which can be brought or through natural inspection, repairs of our current assets, being storages or for the end customers.
Thank you very much. I noticed, I went through Rubis, your parent company, consolidated financial statement for as of December 31, 2019, on their global website. And I noticed within the geographic zone in their financial statements, they noted that within the Cayman Islands, Grand Cayman and Cayman Brac, that there were 11 gas stations, of which 2 on freehold land, 2 white product storage depots, and 1 fully owned aviation depot listed as part of the operations within the for the Cayman Islands. In terms of those 11 gas stations, of which 2 on freehold land, is it that you guys own those 2 gas stations? I'm trying to understand what that explanation is.
It is correct. It's 2 forecourts which were owned by Chevron, and by acquiring Chevron, we became the owners of these 2 service stations, plus the other fuel infrastructure you mentioned.
One of the things we have been trying to also determine is the total capacity that we have on island. Now, I went on Google Earth and I realized I think you guys have like 7 or 8 tanks, that big storage tanks. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. What is available from the sky on Google View is a clear representation of what we have. I would just put a caveat for our Cayman Brac Creek terminal, where not all of the tanks are in service, because we have a storage capacity which is larger than the one we actually use. So not all of the tanks in the Creek terminal are in use at the moment.
Okay. But the ones on Grand Cayman, and I think it was 7, it was a 7 yard in Grand Cayman. Were there 7 things in Grand Cayman?
And that's correct. 3 diesel tank, 2 gasoline tank, and 2 jet tanks, to be precise.
Okay. I doubt you have very much of this information, but would it be possible to supply to the committee clerk, that's the young lady who was sent the invite out, just in terms of the capacity of each of those tanks? One of the things that we've been trying to determine is pretty much fully the max range that we have across the entire country in terms of storage. We have been given different numbers, but we just wanted to calculate it out. I mean, when we're living in the hurricane belt, so if that's something that you can do for us, that would be quite helpful. But one of the things that the public have been trying to understand, and this goes back to the COVID crisis, in terms of the fuel decrease, where we have seen, especially in the North American market, and we had used the example earlier, where within a week we saw in South Florida, gas went from $2.90 a gallon to $1.07 a gallon. And I also did an analysis where I looked at the amount of fuel that was imported in Cayman for the start of 2020, and also even compared to prior periods, as available at the Port Authority website. And one of the things that we have been trying to understand is, even despite the duty and everything else, which is 75 cents per gallon, what or when it is that we can pretty much expect to get cheaper fuel at the pump.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. The prices of fuel in the US and everywhere in the world have collapsed as a consequence of the COVID situation. That is a fact. And I think everybody has in mind that I think that it was the WTI index, which is a crude product index, not a refined fuel, which is what we bring to the island because we are not a refiner. At some point went negative, which was unique and highly commented in the press. I have some accurate figure I'm happy to share with you about how did our supply worked during the COVID situation. Our supplies, as shared with the OFREG each time we import a tanker, are based on Platts. Platts is the average of the transaction for a specific product in the Gulf Coast, which is where the vast majority of our products are being sourced. So the Platts being an average, it means that some guys pay more than the average, some guys pay less than the average. And of course, if you are a large continental player, you would pay less. If you are an offshore importer, you will pay more. This is just to set the picture and what difference there is between WTI, which is stocks of crude oils which are sitting in a tanker coming from Middle East or wherever in the world, awaiting for capacity to be refined, which are driven by then the capacity for storing the refined product. So that's two very different elements. The Platts for gasoline, which is for the excluding CUC fuels and aviation fuel, represents the vast majority of what we sell to the end customer, to the individuals or the car drivers. Is quoted at the Platts, and before the COVID, so I would say at the beginning of March, the Platts was quoted around 150 US cents per US gallon. What's important is just to keep the 150 figure because it will come as an element of comparison. When demand obviously fell down in an unprecedented manner globally, this Platts index fell to 50. That was mid-March. Then prices have gone up as a consequence of demand resuming differently in different markets, of course. Of course, it came back to 100, and now it's at 125. Okay, so we are not at the pre-COVID Platts level, which again is the price our supplies are based on, but nearly. There has been an enjoyable moment when refined prices in the US were a third of what they are usually, or they were previously to the COVID, but now they have gone back to, I would say, previous days levels. What happened is that here in Cayman Islands, we usually import a tanker of multi-fuel product a month. That's the usual pattern, which is driven by the demand for each of the various grades we import. So when the prices collapsed and the demand collapsed as well, we had an existing stock which had been procured at pre-COVID prices, as anyone can guess. When prices collapsed, we then imported a further tanker for which we enjoyed cheap prices. And as a consequence, ahead of even having this tanker being loaded in the US Gulf Coast for heading then to Cayman Islands, after a discussion I had with several ministers, we dropped our wholesale prices by 40 cents and then by 80 cents in Grand Cayman. That was at the end of March, the 20th of March to be precise, 40 cents and minus 80 cents after we had received our tanker on the 14th of April. Okay? So this was a decision which was made even before we knew precisely what sort of price, what sort of supply cost we would get from the upcoming tanker. And we did it because we had the feeling that since there was huge pressure internationally, about the fuel prices and the huge concern locally about how large companies could help the local population, we did it. One word about Cayman Brac. The drop of prices for gasoline in Cayman Brac at the same dates was by 90 cents, 90. Okay? What happened next is that our next tanker, which we brought to the island, came with prices, supply prices based on Platts, which had started going up again. We had 2 further tankers coming, and each time the parcels of fuel were more expensive than the previous ones, and we are expecting one, I guess, next week, which will be even more expensive than the previous 2 ones. So if there is an expectation that at local level prices could have gone negative or could have been cut by half compared to what they were before the COVID situation we all suffered, I must say that this is just impossible because we don't have the luxury of deciding on the spot how much quantity at what price we are going to buy and bring to the island. We have to nominate ships 45 days in advance, and the storage capacities we have cannot be expanded in the event that we wanted to welcome more product at a time where it was convenient to buy them because the prices were cheap.
Thanks very much for that, Mr. Nicholas. Earlier you said the pre-COVID price was $150 US in Platts Gulf, and that's based on US gallon. If I was to convert that to imperial gallons, that'd be roughly $1.50 CI, just because it's roughly the difference. So it's $1.50 CI equivalent in terms of imperial gallon start in the Gulf. I understand from industry it's 15 cents in terms of per gallon in terms of shipping. So that put us at roughly 1.65. And then we also have 75 cents duty on gas. So we're talking about landed on gas. Gas is 75 cents. CUC is 25 cents, but gas is 75 cents. So we're talking $2.40 CI landed in terms of by the time you put on the transportation and you put on the duty, we're talking $2.40 CI, and this is pre-COVID. The question then, I noticed, like for example in the Bahamas, where the government regulates the margin between diesel and gas from ship to pump in terms of the retailers and everything else. If it lands here at $2.40 and we're going back to pre-COVID, there are times when the price of the pump was well above 100% of that at even more than $5 a gallon. And I think this is where a lot of people is trying to reconcile why the margins are so high in terms of Cayman, where 240 landed costs becomes basically $5, $5.50 at the pump. And that's what we're trying to reconcile, and that's what we're trying to understand. What drives that markup?
I'm afraid I'm not competent to comment on other markets because I'm in charge of the Cayman Islands, but since I had heard that the Bahamas market could serve as a comparison to the Cayman market, especially for the fuels, I did a bit of research.
Actually, just for the record, I would not compare Bahamas to Cayman because Bahamas have a different dynamics, and I do have challenge with the Bahamas market, and the reason being the fuel, because I've spoken to some of my colleagues in the Bahamas, and they themselves question the value of the fuel that actually, the value of the fuel has arrived in the Bahamas, but that's a different story for a different time. But one of the things that I looked at was in terms of their margin that they allowed. And while it's something that is not being entertained yet at this point by price control by the regulator or anything else, but at the end of the day, I'm still just trying to understand within the Cayman market, the 240 in terms of landed costs, basically more than doubling to more than $5, and that's just what I'm trying to understand. But not to use the Bahamas as a model because I have concerns with them on that side, just to set the record.
I don't have the elements of comparison to answer clearly your question. Each time we have a tanker coming in, we supply the OFREG with all the invoices and the volume information about what we import, in what quantities. And we have recently answered to the OFREG a request for information, which gives clearly how much stock we had in stock before receiving a tanker, what was the cost of stock of this existing inventory, how it melts with the freshly brought stock of fuel, and what is the new cost of inventory. And all these information are made available to the OFREG permanently. If I wanted to answer precisely to your question, if you want to compare two prices the same month, as I explained earlier, it can simply depend on at what time or which precise day was the tanker loaded. If a tanker was loaded a day when the Platts was at 50, at 80, at 100, or at 150, it makes a whole difference. Then the other element is what do you have in stock when you receive this tanker? If the new product you're bringing in at a cheaper price represents less than half the overall inventory you have after receiving this tanker, then it's a weighted average of the price or the value of the cost you had before and the value of the cost for the overall inventory you get. And as you may guess, when we have bringing new tankers during the COVID situation, our stock of fuels were there when they are usually there because the demand had just collapsed. So that would probably be a factual reason for suffering differences. But once again, I don't have the elements of the build-up of the prices you mentioned for the Bahamas, so I cannot really make a factual assessment or comparison.
No, I'm just using the 150 as the high mark because I mean that's normal price. I'm ignoring COVID. I'm just using the 150 as the normal, and what I'm just going back to normal times. I'm just trying to understand the normal rate where it lands here at $2.40. By the time we add in transportation and we add in the government duty, it's at $2.40 CI. I'm just trying to understand what else goes into it to get it up to the $5 plus in normal times. And that's what I'm trying to understand, where it literally doubles. And well, more than doubles, that's what I'm trying to understand. Whereas I think, and where I referenced the Bahamas, because I think they had set, I think maybe the equivalent of maybe around 30 cents, 27 cents equivalent margin for diesel, for CI, and 33 cents for gas. So I'm trying to understand, how is it that the Bahamas set a margin between ship to pump, but yet we, without any margins, is going from 240 to say almost, well, above $5. And that's what we're trying to understand in a normal time. What is the driver? Is it the Cayman as a high cost? Is it high fixed cost? And that's what we're just trying to understand.
Through to you, Chairman, and sorry if I forgot to mention this in my previous replies, apologies. Firstly, the prices don't double. I mean, if we're talking about 245 times 2, we would be at 5. Doing my homework this morning on the road, the Rubis forecourt was at 377 for regular gasoline. So I think it's a bit exaggerated.
No. I'm ignoring the COVID environment. I'm just going back to the normal.
Yeah, but I'm talking about today. I could use a reference 3 months ago, or within 3 months. It wouldn't make such a difference. The explanation about what adds to this landed cost, inclusive of duties, is just the cost we have to operate and make these fuels available to the end customer. That's simply, Cayman is an expensive country in which we operate because we have to make available a whole lot of services and materials and equipment which can be managed only by overseas companies. And when we have to build, for instance, just to give you an example, when we have to build a tank in our fuel terminal, which is what we are preparing and hopefully will be delivering as soon as the borders reopen, we are talking about more than $1.5 million. And as talking to our contractors in the US, they say that it's between 2.5 and 3 times what the cost of a similar equipment would cost in the US. We have talented people running the company, and the cost of labor in Cayman is very high. The cost of infrastructure is high, and the throughput is low. Cayman Island is a 65,000 people country. And basically what it takes to import, store and distribute fuel is about the same if the country was 2 or 3 times larger in terms of population, and the divider which is required to offset this cost can only be what it is, and this raises very high costs for operating, for depreciation, which unfortunately cannot be offset with a sufficient volume in order to compare or try to understand how could fuels be cheaper than what they are at the moment.
Are you suggesting that a welder or a steel fabricator in Cayman is more expensive than one in the US?
I do, yes.
Do you have comparative figures you can give us? Because in the US, those things are usually union driven. And when I talk to my friends here in the steel making industry, they're being hired for $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour, whereas in the US, they're in the 20s.
I don't operate in the US, so once again, I cannot make elements of comparison, but I've got quite a significant island experience in my background, and it's a fact that we have highly competent personnel on island, but the cost for their compensation is probably one of the highest I've seen in my business life.
Because we keep hearing that one of the reasons for fuel is the high cost of living, but I would argue that the biggest driver of the high cost of living is the cost of fuel. So are you suggesting that we're in a vicious cycle, that you drive up the cost of living, then you justify higher prices because of the cost of living and the cost of doing business?
Honorable Chairman, of course, it can be seen as a vicious circle, and I think in some ways it is. when you want to have fuel distributed to the end customer through a service station, no matter who owns the service station, the price of land is only growing. The cost of compensation for staff is growing. The cost of any service is growing. I mean, the inflation last year was, I think, if I remember well, above 4%. I suspect it won't be the case this year, but all the services you are requiring for delivering from A to Z your service is suffering ever increasing costs. So we do our best to control this cost, to make higher efficiency when operating our infrastructure. But at some point, the costs are what they are. And for some of them, we have limited ability to challenge them.
Do you have a average cost per gallon as a percentage of the cost of fuel arriving at the pipeline at Jackson Point versus delivering the gallon to the gas station?
I would say that the landed cost, including duties, out of the wholesale price we sell our fuels at, is more than the 2/3.
I'm including the duty in your and the price to deliver it to your tank, right? Because that's part of the price that you pay to get it into your tank. You have to pay the duty before it's delivered into your tank. What I'm asking is there an average cost per gallon for the operation of storage and distribution in the local market?
I don't have this breakdown in mind, I'm sorry.
Okay, is there a delay between when you purchase fuel on the market and its actual delivery to Cayman, and what is that delay, if there is one?
Typically, if Rubis Cayman Islands Limited was to purchase and ship on its own fuels from the Gulf Coast to here, it will be incredibly expensive because we just represent nothing in the shipping world and in the refiner world. So another Rubis affiliate is in charge of dealing with negotiating contracts, being annual or spot, for sourcing the product and for shipping it down to the Cayman Islands. The way it works is that a ship usually does the milk run. They load products in the Gulf Coast, then they discharge, load again some grades, discharge, load again, so that we have the best mix between getting the cheaper product and getting the cheapest freight elements, freight being shared with other jurisdictions where the tanker is delivering. Traditionally, I would say that it's a bit more than 2 weeks between the moment the fuel is loaded for us and the moment it can be discharged in the Cayman Islands. But then we have a local factor, which is weather. Sometimes it takes up to 1 week before we can have the tanker moored in front of our fuel terminal. And since we don't have a shelter or a harbor where through any weather the tanker can berth and discharge the product, it can bring a significant addition to the delay or time frame between loading port and discharge port.
What you're saying is that because you can purchase a bigger volume on the Gulf Coast and charter a bigger tanker to take it to the Bahamas to storage, and then use a smaller tanker to do what you call the milk run, which is a number of islands. Do you have any idea what would be the cost of a much smaller tanker just to deliver to Cayman from Florida or the Gulf Coast?
I have no idea, sir. This is not something I'm in charge of, but I'm very sure, because although we use a Rubis subsidiary, we don't take as a granted the way they manage our supply. We are heavily challenging them because everybody seems to think that it's a granted that fuel is always available, but you can believe me, it's an everyday challenge to make sure we have the right grades of products and the right quantities at the right time. And it's probably one reason why my hair have turned gray so quickly.
Well, that's age, but anyway, experience. The question is, who pays for the cost of the storage facility in the Bahamas or wherever it is? Is there a difference between the purchase price on the Gulf Coast and the price by which it is sold to Cayman from your storage facility in the Bahamas?
We don't, properly speaking, store ourselves fuel in the Bahamas for the Cayman Islands. If we are to load some fuel in the Bahamas, in Puerto Rico, in Jamaica, or wherever in the Caribbean for the Cayman Island markets, it will be sourced from third parties, not from Rubis companies or Rubis stocks.
Maybe I misunderstood you. I thought you said that you were able to take advantage of better prices at Platte because you could buy higher volumes than what was required for Cayman. And you take that to a storage facility. Was I mistaken?
I guess my explanation was not correct. What I meant is that the tanker going from the Gulf Coast to Cayman Island will stop at many occasions in several jurisdictions, and they will load and discharge product for other customers. Our parcels of product are by advance set in quantities, and we know in advance that this product will be loaded here, another product will be loaded there, and a third product will possibly be loaded in a third jurisdiction, because that's where there is the best value for money. But we don't like discharge a product somewhere so to take advantage of a better price which has just arisen out of the blue. The shipping schedule is set in advance, and although it suffers many contingencies, the challenge for us is to determine 45 days in advance what are the quantities we will need at what time, and when the tanker is showing up, make sure we have sufficient storage capacity to receive this product, which is another challenge. But we cannot play around with give me a little bit more, give me little bit less. What about if I take this product instead of this one? This is not the way it works.
The 2-week delay is because the milk run, although in most of the majority of your markets, Cayman would be closer to the Gulf Coast than most of the others. Is the 2-week delay because you go to the other countries first? Because it can't take 2 weeks to sail from Houston to Cayman.
I think it's like if you were using a Uber shared service in a continental market. You enjoy a better price, but you have to bring a bit of flexibility into when you will receive your fuel, because the tanker will stop indeed in locations which make the duration of the trip longer. But at the end of the day, it brings a higher efficiency in terms of cost, because you have mutualized the cost of the shipments, and it's shared between different buyers.
You don't own the ships, you charter ships.
Rubis owns some ships, but they are not the ones which are delivering the Cayman Islands.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nicholas, you had mentioned earlier that the high cost of living or the cost of doing business in Cayman is one of the primary drivers as to why the landed cost becomes more than double. One of the things I looked at was going through the consolidated financial statements from Rubis, and while it's not broken down by island, I noticed that within the Caribbean between 2018 and 2019, that the total revenues within the Caribbean region dropped by 5%. And one of the things I look back at, and also comparing the actual consumer price index that's done by the Economic Statistics Office, looking at the difference in terms of fuel increases between, and this is something you can look at when you get a chance probably. It's on page 92 of the Compendium of Statistics, and it basically looks at regular fuel, premium fuel, and also diesel full service. And again, this doesn't include CUC, but just between even 2017 and 2018, the amount of increase in the actual fuel is even above that of the consumer price index in terms of the actual increases in the price, the consumer price index. As a matter of fact, over the last 2 years, between 2016 and 2018, the prices actually went up by roughly 13% on fuel. But again, when you look at the 2-year increases, again, in the consumer price index, it is nowhere close to 13% increase. And if you go back and you also look at the historical value of, or the cost of fuel used in the Platts Gulf Coast, again, you don't see that 13% increase that we had between 2016 to 2018. And those are the kind of questions that we're having in terms of what is driving the cost, where it doesn't seem to be a rhyme or a reason. No, as we said before, we do recognize that there is a responsibility to the shareholders, that there's got to be a reasonable rate of return. And what we're trying to understand is if there is something that is driving your costs up that is government or policy driven, we need to understand what these things are. So at least if we can make it cheaper for you to do business, then it'll be cheaper for the consumer. And those are the kind of stuff that we want to understand, is like, what are the main drivers? I mean, you had mentioned, like, you know, you have to pay for your talent, which we agree. But what are the other issues that really would push the price up from, say, that $2.40 to that $5 plus? What are the other components? Because if there's something there that we need to tackle, then we need to tackle it. We need to fix it, because ultimately, like you said, as the previous witness said, is a matter of public education. And I think everyone can accept that the Cayman Islands is an expensive place in which to do business, but we need to then understand what are the drivers of those costs to basically get the price down. And in your opinion, what do you think that we can or should work on reducing in order to get the price down?
Well, the first component of the price is the Platts. So the cheaper the Platts, the cheaper the Platts in the U.S. Gulf Coast, the cheaper the fuel over here. That there is a direct link between these two elements. Then the local costs. We have to keep infrastructure operated at the highest standard with key people. So we try to permanently gain efficiency in that domain, which is one of the main costs, together with depreciation and staff compensation we have. These costs are increasing each and every year. So we work with the Rubis Caribbean department to permanently find and select contractors helping us delivering our maintenance and investment duties in a manner which is efficient in terms of cost. When you are a contractor from the US and you have to fly to the Cayman Islands or just give a quote for doing some specialist repairs, the trouble is that these guys always put the safety elements and another layer of security margin on top, because they never know before they reach the island what the work will actually be, how long it will take, what the local cost of things they have to subcontract will be, what's the duration of the travel time and everything. So we try to leverage as much as we can through our Caribbean, not head office, but hub, I would say, to find the best value for money in our investment. And this is critical because it means every single dollar you invest will build up your cost base for the next 20 years, because we are doing long-term investment. So we try and work every day towards bringing cheapest investment, which will be, as a conclusion, cheapest depreciation and cheapest component in our cost base for the future. Then we have our internal costs, and we are permanently challenged by the Rubis Group to gain efficiency, and we have OPEX reduction plans, we have salary reviews, we have plenty of domains in which we try and target to be best in class in order to gain efficiency. Ultimately, the two leverages I would see is volume and quality of products. Every day we fight for offering our customers the best value for money offer, which is bringing additivated fuels from the US, quality fuels, which offer good MPG, and we fight competition so to have the best possible market share. And this is a critical element because, once again, the more fuel you sell, the more it acts as a cost divider. So on one hand, it's about spending not as few as you can, but getting the best value for money for every single product or service you buy. And on the second hand, you want to have a throughput which is as high as possible so that you offset your cost to the highest possible, in the highest possible manner. And this is why, to achieve this mix, the prices offered to the end customers is at the center of the game and is the key component. So we keep an eye on prices. We try to make them as affordable as they can, so to deliver the best mix, because we earlier talked about a vicious circle. The vicious circle is as well that the higher you sell your prices, your fuel for, the lesser the volume you will make, and then the higher your fuel prices will be in the future because you don't have this divider.
I want to ask the white elephant in the room. Going through your website, I couldn't help but notice, looking at the different on the site, on the islands that you do have a different website, and it shows a number of locations. I couldn't help but notice in the Cayman Islands, compared to other islands, as a part of their population, that we seem to have a lot of gas stations in the Cayman Islands. And the question I really have to ask, I mean, and this is just, I mean, you can give me your opinion. For the population that we have, do you believe that we have too many gas stations? Because I'm looking at the numbers, I'm looking at the consumption, and I'm looking at the average of roughly what each gas station used to do. And I must confess that in a previous life, I did do accounting work for some of those smaller gas stations shortly out of college. So I do have an idea in terms of their working operations and what they make as margins and everything else. And I can safe to say, for the gas stations that I did, both, well, Texaco and ESSO at the time, none for Rubis or Sol, but prior to, that most of those gas stations literally made their money from the convenience stores, not pretty much from the margins itself in terms of selling gas. And I couldn't help but ask, do we have too many gas stations in Cayman for our size? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think there are too many gas stations. What is true is that if you take a country's network of service stations, it's a permanent evolving matter. In the recent past, we have closed some service stations, or some Rubis forecourts. Rubis branded forecourts have closed, I should say, and some others have been created. a large number of motorways or highways have been created recently, in the recent past, and there is quite a significant project with the towards East End highway, which will be built in the future. And there are also growing population areas which are developing. I think West Bay and Prospect have grown a lot and will keep on growing a lot. So for that reason, you have to reshuffle every couple of years your network of service station, because you need to be where the customer need fuel and other things which are sold at service station. So you cannot just contemplate and change nothing. It doesn't really answer your question, but I think the increasing number of service stations also means that when you create a new service station, since the size of the cake will not be changing, you might create the fact that another service station will become obsolete and will close in a few years. I don't see any ridiculously low unit throughput on the Rubis forecourts. Of course, there can be a strong variation between one site and another, but I've been operating in countries where the throughput is even lower, made of plenty of small garages. Some other countries have a smaller number of forecourts, but with much larger infrastructure. I don't think reducing or increasing the number of forecourts will be a significant game changer in terms of prices. The more forecourts, the more investment involved, but the more competition at the same time. And the dealers are setting their prices. And once again, looking at price displays this morning, there is a fierce competition between dealers, between brand networks, and within brand networks as well, because I've seen for some brands quite significant variances in prices if you take one or another forecourt from the same brand. So the larger number of players, the higher the competition, I would say. Of course, if the number of stations were to double, it would become ridiculous, but I don't think there is any area of concern regarding the number of forecourts at the moment.
Sorry, when you're saying the higher number of competitors, one of the things that I think has been established last week based on testimony that this committee received is that barring refuel, which has a very small market share, between Rubis and Sol, even if you're competing at the retail end, until there are major price change at the wholesale end. I mean, because those guys at the end of the day is only the margin that they can make, and that margin is basically a few cents. I mean, roughly between 15 to 30 cents is pretty much, and that's just going back from my memory, that they actually make up on the fuel. So there's not that much room to really play with on the dealer end if the wholesale price is already set at a certain price. Now, if it's a situation where your landing cost, going back again to the normal times, if your landing is $2.40, and then you're selling it to the dealer at, say, $1 markup, which is at $3.40, and then the dealers are now adding it up to another $1.60 to get it to the $5, then I can understand that. But the question then, and we do, and that's one of the reasons why we have, I think, one of the dealers coming here this afternoon, is to try to also understand where along the supply chain or the distribution chain, where it lands at $2.40, it gets up to $5, and we're trying to understand where that extra $2.60, where along the line it is incurring the most cost. And then that's what it is, I think, that we as policymakers and as legislators need to go and tackle. Because ultimately it is a commodity that everyone needs. It's considered essential. And we need to understand where we can arrest the $2.60 markup. because in most other countries that we have looked at, and nowhere else that we have seen where it is more than 100% markup between landed costs and into the pump. And that's what we're trying to understand. And I think ultimately that is the focus that off-reg and everyone else needs to look at, because as you rightfully said, if you do have your costs that you need to recoup in terms of your investments and everything else, and also provide your shareholders with a reasonable rate of return, at some point the regulators have to come back to us and say, well, if these are the internal targets that both Rubis as a group has set and Sol as a group has set for their company, and this is what they're working towards, then at some point, as with any market, if you have a set target, demand and supply, we have to look at, we know what the demand is, then at some point we have to do what we have to do to fix the supply side. Because the demand isn't going to change, but we can look at rules to basically affect supply. Or maybe there are things that we can do for demand too, but that'd be much more difficult. But in the short term, it is on the supply side. And one of the things, as you said, I've seen gas station pop up less than a mile from another gas station, then one closes, one opens. I mean, a perfect example, you could use, we can call it, take Medak, for example. You had Medak, and then right up the road from Medak was another, was it Peanuts, which is, no, yeah, but that's all. I mean, they're competitors. But I'm looking at even in network, just even the closeness of some of the stations to each other. And you access, and of course, naturally, Medak closed down. I mean, so, and you look at that, excuse me, and then you ask yourself, I mean, we basically traded one for one, but is this the model that we're going to get to where, you know, basically, they just, someone has to just lose. And that's the question I'm asking is, I'm looking at it, I'm looking across the Caribbean, I'm looking at population, I'm looking at number of cars, I'm looking at consumption, and I still see just too many suppliers. As you said rightfully, that the pie is on the excise, but the mouths to feed on the pie are actually growing. And at some point, somebody's going to start to starve, and we're already seeing it now. Most gas stations right now is either going into the joint partnerships, they're doing different things just to survive and so forth, and we're seeing that as a trend. You know, but we need to understand where along the supply line is driving that cost, and that's what we need to tackle, is what it is. We accept it's a high-cost jurisdiction, but there are some things I think that we definitely have to fix, and this is a priority for us. That's the reason why we're having these sessions. And what I'm looking for is a situation where off-reg has asked you guys to do something that is driving up the costs, or it's work permits, or, I mean, we're just trying to figure out, is it the company fees? Is it the royalties you pay to the government? I mean, is it the duty? We're just trying to understand what it is that is driving up the overall costs. In normal times, we accept that COVID is a little bit different, and eventually we have to get back to the normal times, but the 100% markup is something that we need to tackle, or the more than 100% markup, and that's what we're trying to understand, what is driving that.
How many licenses does Rubis have to do business in the Cayman Islands?
Well, we have one trade and business license, which covers the overall of our activities. We have LCCL, if I remember well, license,
Local companies control license. But the business license that you have is the local company control license related to the two.
Yeah.
They're not two separate licenses.
There are two separate documents and two separate licenses. We have a yearly license, and we have a 10-year, if I remember well, LCCL. So that's two different things.
Mr. Jefferson, maybe you can help me here. But if a company has a 12-year, I think is the actual length of LCCL, do they have to have, in addition to that, an annual business license to operate?
I may, Chairman, because I have the elements under my eyes. So we have an LCCL, which is actually 12 years license, so which is by the shareholding of our company an obligation. Then we have TNB, as any local business has.
I'm just trying to find out whether, from the financial sector, if he happens to know now, whether the LCCL that you have is like a company license, but to do business you need an annual trade and business license. So it's the same license is what I'm trying to find out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chair, over the break, lunch break, I will endeavor to find out.
Okay, thank you. When you say you own 2 gas stations, that means you own the land, the building, etc. You don't operate them, you lease them back.
We are not allowed to operate any service station, so we have third-party dealers who operate the forecourts.
Okay. The other 9, I think you say you had a total of 11 stations in the island. The other 9, do you lease the facility from the owner and then release it to somebody else to operate?
This is the case for 2 service stations.
For 2?
Yes.
And is there a difference between what you lease it from the owner and what you lease it to another operator for?
It is back to back.
Back to back. That's what you said?
Yes.
That means there's no difference in the price?
No.
Okay. You rely on the fact that they now have your product on that station to your advantage and leasing it back, right?
Well, basically on, I think, all forecourts but one, no matter if we are the owners, the lessor, or if a third party is the owner of the site, we always pay for the fuel infrastructure. So all the tanks, dispensers, and canopies are typically elements, investments which are made by the company.
Okay. Would you do business with anyone who owned their own tanks and infrastructure?
Of course.
Okay. And the lease that you set up is the fuel component is separate from what I call the store, the building. It's a different lease for the storage tanks and the pumps, separate from the building that we have the stores inside of?
No, there's no segregation as such.
Okay, and that lease is, the cost of that lease, is that a percentage of income or is it fixed?
It is fixed.
Fixed, okay. What is your, I don't have your accounts before me, what is your annual depreciation on capital investment?
Just under 2 millions.
Pardon?
Under 2 millions.
Under 2 million?
Yeah. I mean, the OFREG has got our financial statement.
No, I'm not.
For competitive sensitivity, I don't want to give you the accurate figure here, but it's available through the OFREG.
Okay, I'm not an accountant, so in other words, if you invest in infrastructure, tanks and pumps, what is the time frame that you expect to make back the money that you invested in those pumps? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years?
Our investments are typically depreciated over 20 years.
Okay.
So we are looking at doing some standards return on investment rates as applicable to the industry, which are usually between 5–6%. That's the norm on such investments.
Okay. Are the length of your leases related to that 20-year depreciation of the return on investment?
We try to, but it's not always the case.
Okay. Is it easy, if I own a facility and I leased it to you, is it easier for me to get out of that lease, or is that a very complicated process?
Well, as long as the parties agrees for, and this is the case for any contract, it should be fairly simple.
And all of your leases have get-out clauses, so to speak, termination clauses in them?
Yeah, they have a duration. It's not evergreen leases.
No, and I'm asking the duration. Does it have a termination clause during the length of the lease?
They usually do, but with, I mean, as for any contract, there must be conditions which have to be met or triggers which can make one or the other party break the contract.
What is the range of volume of fuels that you have delivered to Jackson Point?
On a yearly basis, on a monthly basis?
Per shipment, between shipments, I mean, what's your average volume and delivery? Let's see you, Chris, get a number.
About 1.5 million barrels a year.
In how many gallons make up a barrel?
34 from the top of my head.
Eh?
A barrel would be 34 gallons,
74 gallons.
if I remember well.
Do you have the breakdown on the different fuels, on the 1.5 million barrels, diesel, does that include CUC?
Yeah, this is overall. Once again, this is a bit competition sensitive, but the majority of it goes to CUC. Then the second largest volume would be for aviation, and the balance would be for retail and commercial customers.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can get the details from off-reg if we need it. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Bush, sorry.
I just tell you that and you ask that, sir. Through you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, sir, you must respect that this island, a lot of our product on this island has to deal with the environment, tourism, and so forth. And what year did you all buy out Chevron?
That was in 2012.
Okay, thank you. I think it was in July of 2015. Through you, Mr. Chair, one of your tanks sprung a leak. Has it ever been? And then just, I think it was late 2019, once again, a leak was discovered. I was not able to determine whether it's the same tank or another tank. When these leaks happen, do you all take out the bottoms to see, or go in to find out what has caused the leak, if the bottom is what's happening or what has caused the leaks?
Of course, we work to when there is an environmental issue caused by our products, we have to work in close relationship with the OFREG and with the water authority. Firstly, to remediate in full or up to the standard which is agreed by the regulator and the water authority, which we do, and learn from what happened, so to ensure that it doesn't repeat again in the future.
So I think it's too short a time to have a report on the 2019 leak, but the 2015, I think I said June or July, I think it was July, should be able to get a report on what was wrong with the tank, why it leaked. We should be able to get that by now. Am I correct in saying that, sir?
I think the one you are relating to must be a failure of a tank on a service station, not in a fuel terminal, correct?
I have to go back in my notes, but I'm pretty sure it was the fuel terminal.
Well, that was before my time, so I cannot give you absolute answers, but what is a fact is that all remediations which had been ongoing at our fuel terminals have been closed and have satisfied the conditions imposed by the OFREG and the Water Authority.
Okay, sir, I guess I'll have to go through off-reg, but it can't be before your time if you bought it in 2012, and this thing took place in 2015. But thank you very much, sir. To get those answers fully cleared up in my mind, I will go through off-reg, but appreciate it. Thank you.
Just to clarify, it was before my own time because I've been in charge of the company for the last 2 years only. Yeah, my time. And the incident from 2019 is currently under investigation and monitoring with the competent authorities.
Thank you very much, because we have to be double careful with our environment. We're a small country, and if that goes, I'm sure a lot of you all will disappear as well. So we have to be really careful with our environment. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Sorry, just to confirm, you said you guys do about 1.5 million barrels a year? That includes CUC?
That's a rough figure.
Yeah.
Don't consider it a precise one.
No,
but to give an idea, yeah, that would be it.
That's fine. And how much gallons you say in each barrel?
Once again, one barrel is 208 liters and 34 gallons, if I remember well.
34?
34.
Okay, thanks. All right. I thought you said 74, that's what threw me off. Okay, now that says the accent. Okay, thanks very much.
Mr. Miller, through you, one last follow-up. And there is no, I asked this of the last dealer, and I'll ask the same thing of yourself. At no time, is there any times that yourself and Sol get together and determine any type of profit margin or anything, any type of collusion?
Certainly not.
Thank you.
Sol, I will add that Sol and Rubis are two large Caribbean competitors fighting hard on many other jurisdictions than the Cayman Islands, and we have strict guidances and trainings about competition regulation, which we strictly adhere to.
Thank you very much, sir.
One question, follow up on environment. You have sufficient containment at Jackson Point to contain the total stored at Jackson Point within your boundaries at the moment, right?
We are operating under the API standard, which is the American Petroleum Institute, and we design together with the OFREG our infrastructure so that they match the best standard, of course, and we are audited every year, technically speaking, before we get our operating permit being renewed.
And what is that standard as a containment percentage of actual volume stored?
I don't have the figure in mind, I'm sorry.
Any other questions? Mr. White.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Morning, Mr. Nicholas. Well, good afternoon. I asked the president of Sol, Mr. Pierre, earlier, and I would just like to ask you the same question, but I would like to make a comment. Earlier, you were asked a question by the member from Bordentown West, and you gave him an answer. It was concerning if there are too many gas stations. If you believe there's too many gas stations on the island for a population of 65,000 people, I would just like to say that I believe if the member from BT West had asked the member from GT West, he would have got a different answer. But the questions I would like to ask you.
I will take the answer, actually. I'll direct the answer to you then. Thanks.
How did you deal with the pricing during the COVID-19 pandemic? That was one question. And what sort of struggles did the pandemic caused your company. But I would like to ask a further question that I didn't ask the president from Saul. How capital consuming is it to operate the business, not only during the normal times, but especially during COVID-19 times?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for this question. COVID, of course, brought a lot of unexpected elements to the way we operated during that time. We have been one of the essential services running 24 hours with a team dedicated to ensuring that those who needed fuels, they were not a lot, I'm afraid, but those who needed these fuels could get access to them. And that was a great achievement from our team. One big challenge, aside, of course, the drop in sales, was that the supply pattern got completely changed because the aviation sector or segment has just collapsed overnight when the airport shut. And we traditionally bring in a mix of road fuels, diesel for CUC and Jet A1 for the planes. And one of these three components was no longer necessary, which means that the traditional sources of supply and shipping had to be reshuffled because ourselves suffered a change in what product mix we needed, but the other countries which are delivered between the Gulf Coast and ourselves also had strong discrepancies compared to the usual supply pattern. And of course, yeah, it was a stressful situation, but we managed to keep everyone in the company employed. We even paid the pensions during this period of time. And we are now all back in the office with the appropriate safety measures. And we have reshuffled our operations so to have our aviation personnel kept busy delivering tasks for us as they not really have the opportunity to perform their regular duties.
And also, referring to what the member from West Bay was asking you about the tanks leaking and so on, that affects the cost of you operating. So that's why I was really asking that further question. So how do you deal with all that?
No, we have contingency plans in place, and we are able to operate without using our full storage capacities by adapting the supply pattern. And obviously the current drop in demand makes things easier to manage these days.
Mr. Chairman, just one quick question to Mr. Nicholas. Sol advised earlier that they will be investing in several $1 million worth of, over the next few years on their safety measures, okay, in terms of safety around in their terminal. Do you all have any plans to upgrade any of your safety measures in the next couple of years, just to ensure that, you know, the issue with Sol and the fire? Just so if you could just give us an update on if you have any plans.
Yeah, we have very clear plans. Usually, I mean, not usually, as a matter of fact, a storage tank needs to be inspected every 10 years. That's more conservative than the API regime, which is the applicable standard. So every 10 years, we gas-free, clean, empty gas-free and clean our tanks, run an independent inspection of such tank, and then proceed with either the repairs or a full replacement of the tank. So to make sure that we have robust storage capacities in which we can operate for another 10 years under safe conditions. And as soon as travel restrictions are lifted, we have a team coming from the US for rebuilding in full one of the 2 largest tanks in our Jackson Point terminal. In parallel, we are investing in fire defense because protecting our assets is critical for our company, but also for the general public, because this is where the fuel is made available on a daily basis. So we are implementing at the moment some foam protection system to protect the loading gantries of both our Jackson Point and Creek terminal in Cayman Brac. We have invested in rejuvenating our fire pump in Cayman Brac, and next year we will start again this circle of 10-year inspection regime, taking back from 2012 when we first inspected the tank. So that's a rolling investment program to make sure that we are at the best standard in liaison with the OFREG, of course, which would advise and recommend some upgrades when they feel necessary, and which we discuss to build our investment plans on an annual basis.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, since your time with Rubis, has there been any safety violations or anything flagged by the government or raised by the government with regards to Rubis?
Not that I am aware of, and obviously I would be very aware of if this had been the case.
Given your response to the COVID experience, the Cayman customers can now realize that reducing demand will drive prices down. Because that's basically what you say happened in COVID, is because the bottom fell out of the sales because there was no demand. And one of you all decided to increase your sales by lowering the price, and then the others had to follow. So if the customers in Cayman decide to boycott one company, in order they could do so by driving the prices down.
The only reason why the prices went down was that we went the extra mile to make an effort on our end, and we enjoyed having one tanker of regular gas, which was procured at the right time when the Platts prices were down. And this is what together brought the prices down by, as I said, 60 cents in Grand Cayman and 90 cents in Cayman Brac in the months of between end of March and mid-April.
So that shipment that came in COVID, the tanks were empty when that shipment came in. There was no delay in reducing the prices because that shipment was so cheap?
That the quantity received in that shipment have been sold now, and we have received 2 other ships since that date.
But I'm talking about the fuel that you already had delivered at a higher price.
So,
because COVID was not that long a period of time and the prices dropped.
No, but to be factual, we have received a tanker the 21st of March, the 18th of May, the 8th of June, and we have one upcoming next week.
And it would have been the 18th of March 1 that the prices went down?
This is correct.
Okay. What was the time like between the tanker arriving on the 18th of March and the price reduction at the pump?
As I said earlier, we passed to the market a significant reduction in price by 40% in Grand Cayman, ahead of the tanker being even loaded. So that will be, I would say, 10 days before we had physically received the product, which was procured at a cheaper price.
Well, the evidence given to us by the fuel section of OFREG as an explanation for the delay in price adjustments based on price of product arriving on the island is because of the volume that is in storage or inventory at the time that that ship arrives. The question I'm trying to find out is, you say it was 10 days between the ship arriving with the cheaper fuel and you consuming all of the fuel that was in your tank, in your inventory, at a higher price?
No, sir. What I was meaning is that we made the decision of dropping our fuel prices because of the COVID context 10 days ahead of receiving the parcel of fuel, which will be the subject of a better supply cost. And usually when we receive, when you load a tanker, it takes 2 weeks before the tanker is discharged on island. And traditionally, the fresh parcel of product would be aggregated to a similar quantity you previously held in stock. That's usually the way it works.
Yeah, so you don't exactly separate the total volume at one price to the total volume. You blend the costs and come up with an average price.
This is a weighted average indeed.
Yeah, okay. So, okay. Well, yeah. One of the is there a particular reason why you are in a retail business? Is it a way of increasing your market share, or?
I didn't fully understand your question, I'm sorry.
You're in a wholesale business. You've decided to go into the retail business. My question is, was that so that you could increase your market share?
Well, the mix of segments we are operating, the mix of segments we are operating, is the typical downstream oil type of segments. We have the utility fuel supply, which is a key factor to offset the industrial costs of operating fuel terminals. Then we have the airport and aviation segment, which is one sub-segment, and the retail is what any fuel company would be interested in as an addition to other segments of markets. So to answer clearly your question, yes, it's being in the retail segment is a way to increase your market share. That's a fact.
The 80 cents, I think I always just said, in reduction in price wholesale, was that passed through to the customer?
It was, yes.
In what methodology do you have in your lease agreements to ensure that that was a pass-through?
In the lease agreement between who and who, sir?
Pardon?
In which lease agreement?
You have a lease agreement with the operators of the station. Who do you set the prices in the stations that you own for retail, or?
No, we don't. We have a wholesale price which is applicable to the dealers, and they would set their own prices based on this price, based on the inventory they have as well in their tanks and their pricing strategy.
So you have no way in your lease agreements of ensuring that that 80 cents was passed on to the customer?
No, we don't have any way of doing that. It's the competition which applies. If one would be reluctant to do so, knowing that the competitors would do it, would just make it happen at the end of the day.
Any other questions? If not, I want to thank you, Mr. Nick, for coming. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Look, you all have seen that committee, we're not suspended yet. You all have seen that we have been notified by Refuel Cayman that Mr. Dow Travers will be, he will be bringing his attorney, Mr. Michael Alberga, with him. I've agreed to that. We don't have any problem with that. I think,
Sorry. There's, oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman, there's something I'm actually trying to reconcile, and I may need the help of either the Auditor General or members of the finance team. I'm not sure which one we may be able to. That's all right. No, one of the things, just going back at the testimony, and that was given by Mr. Nicholas in terms of roughly the 1.5 million of barrels imported. Give and take, I don't expect an exact science, and I accept that he gave the number off his head. But one of the things, that 1.5 million barrels is equivalent to 34.979 in terms of imperial gallons, roughly 35 per barrel. That would put it at around 51 million gallons per year. But just looking at the Port Authority numbers that has come in for 2019, it was a total of a little over 54 million. For 2018, a little above 51 million. And for 2017, just under 51 million. And for 2016, around 50 million. So I'm not going to say his number is incorrect, but just out of curiosity, I think for this committee, what would be useful, because if it's a situation where we now have one competitor, even at the million mark, that's bringing in 80% of the fuel or 85% of the fuel, the law speaks about people within a dominant market share. And I'd be curious if between the Cayman Port Authority and the off-reg, if we can get those numbers just bottom out in terms of who's bringing in what. Sorry. Is it a case where the Cayman Port is missing something, or something else is coming in that's not being counted, or is a situation where, but the numbers need to be reconciled, because it is a material difference. And even if he's off by 20%, it will still give them pretty much, but based on his testimony, it almost appears as if though they're bringing in 100% of the fuel. And I know that can't be right based on what the Port Authority has. So if you can just look into that for me and report back to the committee in terms of the action. You have the access. Your team has access to all records, statutory body and everything. Yeah, so just to confirm between the Port Authority statistics and with off-reg in terms of where the fuel is coming in. Yeah, well, the ESO also have figures also, but the ESO figures were pulled from the Cayman Port. I'm actually using the Port Authority's website. So the numbers are, like I said, it would be, I just wanted to just confirm if the Port Authority is actually correct or what the actual numbers are between the different providers. All right, thanks so much, Mr. Auditor General.
I don't ask a question I don't already know the answer to. The committee is suspended until 1:30.